Peter King. You can check out Pete's NFL column, Football Morning in America, every Monday exclusively on NBCSports.com. Pete in attendance for the Chargers-Ravens yesterday. Pete, good morning. How are you?
Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm a little fired up over a couple things. You know, the Cody Parkey thing, and, you know, that we love to blame, and it's an easy story to write. And, you know, the Bears didn't lose because of him. And I think that sometimes we're unfair when it comes down to these one-time-only situations. And, you know, so I felt bad for him. I
think the one thing, and look, I'm part of the media madness. I named him my goat of the week. You ought to be able to make a 43-yard field goal. I get that. But I also think that, you know, I think philosophically, much, much, much bigger picture. Why do we watch sports? Okay. We watch sports because there's a chance that you could win. There's a chance you could lose. You know, nothing other than the old extra point really is just about automatic. And, you know, you don't watch sports because you know what's going to happen. You watch sports because you don't know what's going to happen. And so, you know, if a guy misses a 43-yard field goal, yeah, he probably should have made the field goal. But the bottom line in this is that it is a sports event. You're witnessing this. You should be able to have the maturity to look at it and be really, really angry and not go crucify this kid for missing a kick. And so, look, I mean, you know, he deserves blame, you know, either for not getting the kick high enough or whatever.
Yeah.
But let's all simmer down a little bit about nailing the guy to the cross, for crying out loud.
You were in attendance for the Chargers-Ravens. What did you make of that game from start to finish?
You know, I thought one of the best playoff coaching jobs I've seen is by Gus Bradley, the defensive coordinator of the Chargers, who went into Anthony Lynn at the beginning of last week, the head coach of the Chargers, and said, look, Coach, we didn't do a great job on them last time, and nobody's been doing a great job playing them conventionally. So, you know, the Chargers, who already had some injuries at the linebacker position, Gus Bradley basically said, I want to play 7 linebackers. I want our safeties to drop down and play linebackers, and we're going to play all of our corners in the game. And, Dan, one of the funny things is at the end of every game you get this thing from the PR staff of whatever game you're at, and it's called the official NFL play-by-play. And I looked at it in the first play of the game for the San Diego Chargers. All the guys on there are DBs other than the 4 defensive linemen. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And so that was a really smart thing to do, because from the first snap of the game, when Derwin James was there spying Lamar Jackson and nailing him for a 1-yard loss, you just sort of knew that this was going to be a different game. Now, I think they played extremely well on defense, and the Ravens almost came back, but it never really felt like they were going to come back. You know, and look, Lamar Jackson's got a long way to go in the passing game to make people fear him throwing the ball, and that's what he's going to have to work on this offseason.
Would you put in Flacco at any point yesterday?
I probably would have late in the third quarter. You know, you could see that there was no question that Harbaugh was sort of, you know, on the edge of a sword there. But, you know, I think that Harbaugh basically said, okay, look, you know, Flacco hasn't played in 2 months. He's not going to be able to move around well against this voracious defense. So I think his thought was, these guys are killing Lamar Jackson. They sacked him 7 times, as it turns out. And Flacco, I think he thought was going to be too much of a sitting duck.
Flacco's not back next year. Is John Harbaugh back in Baltimore?
My gut feeling is yes, but I don't think anybody knows that right now, Dan, because it's going to be a very interesting question. when Steve Bisciotti realizes that John Harbaugh, and he very well might sign a contract, but I think this Pete Carroll contract, Dan, is going to have some bearing. I think the Pete Carroll contract is going to have some bearing on what happens to Harbaugh, the rumored $11 million a year contract. Now, there are 8 coaches in the league, including Harbaugh, who make at least $8 million, between 8 and whatever Belichick makes, 12, 15. I don't even know what it is. You know, unlike players' contracts, coaches' contracts are not publicized. So I think that Harbaugh, rightfully so, would look at Pete Carroll's deal and said, hey, I've been here longer. I've won more. We've each won a Super Bowl. We better be talking. And again, I have not talked to John Harbaugh about this. I'm just trying to read into who Harbaugh is. He's a tremendously competitive person. And I think he would look at that contract and say, you know, let's start at $11 million for me too.
Talking to Peter King, you can read his column every Monday. It's Football Morning in America. You can see that exclusively on NBCSports.com. A couple other things here with the Eagles advancing and Nick Foles. Nick Foles, and how available is Nick Foles going to be, or how costly is he going to be for a team?
That is a fantastic question. And, Dan, I wrote this morning. Somebody wrote me a letter, and I answer email in my column every week. And somebody wrote to me and said, what's the end game with Foles? Can he win enough to win this job? And I said, look, I talked to somebody last week who's very, very close to this situation, and who said that he thinks that the people in authority at the Eagles should go to Nick Foles and ask him this question. You know, you're not like every other quarterback, and you've seen what happens when you have a chance to go to a bad team, because obviously he knows what happens when he went to the Rams and they were bad. It was a nightmare. He almost quit football. So I wonder whether the Eagles will attempt, at least for one more year, to make him Mariano Rivera, to make him the highest paid relief pitcher in football. And again, he's got an option next year, a team option for $20.6 million. They could keep him if they wanted to, but I think the understanding is, I've always thought that if Nick Foles really wanted to go, that they probably wouldn't stand in his way. But who knows? They may decide that we've got some value here that we'd like to trade. I think it's very much up in the air, and I think the Eagles are very glad they don't have to decide this until after the season.
And you have this reversed where you have your backup making a whole lot more than your starter, because Wentz, I believe, is going to make $700,000 next year. So normally it's the other way around, and you have that luxury. But I'm wondering, Nick Foles is improving his trade value with every performance, and it feels like if you're Jacksonville or some other team, you might be going, you know what, maybe that's our bridge quarterback for the next couple of years. We can bring him in. So I'm kind of curious.
Well, the thing is, Dan, I'll tell you this. Jacksonville's the perfect team, absolutely perfect team for Nick Foles if he were to actually move on, because they have a ready-made defense. They sort of had a blip on their screen this year. If I were the Jaguars, I would be putting all my eggs in Nick Foles' basket, and not just as a bridge quarterback. The guy's just going to be 30 years old next year. And again, you'll see what happens. Maybe it'll turn out that he should be a backup quarterback, or maybe it'll turn out that that if somebody shows so much faith in him that he won't be what he was in Philadelphia, that it was just magic in Philadelphia and the support system and Doug Peterson and last year Frank Reich. So we'll see. But of all the teams that I've thought of, the best overall is the Jacksonville Jaguars for him.
If I would have told you in September the Colts are going to be a real tough out in the postseason, what would you say?
I'd say you would have been crazy. I thought the Indianapolis Colts were definitely on the right path. I've named Chris Ballard as my executive of the year this year. His draft was unbelievably good. He might have gotten the defensive rookie of the year in the second round from South Carolina State. He stepped in, led the league in tackles as a rookie. I talked to Darius Leonard a couple of weeks ago, and he said, hey, I thought this was just going to be a learning year for me. And they put him in the games, and they never took him out. And then, taking offensive linemen twice in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah.
Ballard knew what this team needed. It needed a suit of armor to be built around Andrew Luck, and it needed some defensive playmakers. That's what they've gotten. And but I have to tell you, I'm totally blown away by the very quick transformation. It's why there's so much hope every year. The Indianapolis Colts are the perfect example of why every July, it starts to get late July, early August. You start to look at your team. Hey, maybe we got a chance this year. Who in the world thought the Colts would be on a 10-1 run right now? I certainly didn't.
What do you make of the Cowboys in that performance against Seattle?
I think that was the perfect game for them. You know how a month or so ago Jerry Jones starts talking about how Dak needs to run more?
Yeah.
Dak picked 2 absolutely perfect times to take off with the ball. And he's what he is? He's not the best runner of the quarterbacks in football by any means, but he is one of the smartest runners that you'll see because he knows exactly when to go and when to stay. And I've got great admiration for what he did. And to me, I wrote this in my column. Ezekiel Elliott has now convinced me that he could play in any era of football. He's such a smart football player, in my opinion. Knowing when to stay in bounds, knowing when to go for more yards, when to say die. And I really think that he's the kind of fast, physical back that, again, and this is a difficult thing for me to say because I think Jim Brown's the best running back of all time. He's got a lot of traits of Jim Brown, in my opinion, as far as being physical, but being fast at the same time. I really love him as a football player. And I think that was a really good match for them against Seattle because Seattle's defense is good, but it isn't great. And I think that was a good team for them to play in the first playoff game.
Scoring was down, Pete. Is that just an aberration, or do you think that's what we're going to be seeing here? After the referendum on the future of football after the Chiefs and Rams, and that was everybody had to find their Sean McVay, feels like we're back to what we are normally back to at this time of the year, and that's running the football and playing defense. Well,
as I wrote this morning, teams averaged 23.5 points a game during the regular season this year. And it was down to 18.1 in the first round of the playoffs. And look, Dan, it's 4 games.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you what's going to happen. But, some pretty potentially explosive teams are playing this week. Everybody discounts the Patriots. They're 4th in the NFL in scoring this year. Again, they were well over 400 points. So, the Chargers can score. And the Saints, obviously, even though they had a slump at the end of the season, they're a good scoring team. So, and the Rams, obviously, I think it's more of a blip, but I do think, except for the Ravens, the really excellent all-around defensive teams show up, at this time of year. And I mean, except for the Ravens are one of those. But they lost, I think, because they just couldn't get anything going on offense.
Good stuff as always, Pete. Have a great week. Thanks for talking, and talk to you soon.
Hey, my pleasure, Dan. Have a great one.
That's Peter King, NFL column, Football Morning in America, every Monday, exclusively on NBCSports.com.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV or download the Dan Patrick Show app.